Hello, everyone. My name's Chris Weave, and I am the founder of Connections Online. On behalf of myself, Brent Guillory, Zachary Grant, Merle Robinson, and the Armchair Dragoons, I'd like to thank you all for attending. I'd especially like to thank the Dragoons for all the essential technical services they provided to make Connections Online 2024 happen. This is the final panel of the core events of Connections Online 2024. We still have some extended events that are taking place today and over the weekend, but this is the official end of the official core events. And with this panel, the panel leader will be Stephen Downs Martin, and he's going to talk about your professional wargaming career. And as somebody who's been doing it for 25 years, I can't answer the question about how to have a successful professional wargaming career. I'm looking forward to seeing what Stephen and his panelists come up with. So thank you very much, everybody. And we will do Connections Online next year from the 8th through the 10th of April, 2025. That's the Tuesday through Thursday of that week. And we look forward to seeing you there. Stephen, over to you.
Thank you very much, Chris, and thank you, Armchair Dragoons, and all the people behind the conference. Thank you especially to our panelists and anybody who's watching. So I'll give a brief introduction to the panelists, who are indeed esteemed, and they will be the ones answering the question about how to have a successful professional wargaming career. The first person to talk will be Sara Ulrich. Sara is a global specialist of key decision and planning support methodologies, ranging from business wargaming, simulation, scenario planning, foresight, negotiation, strategy, and contingency planning, applied to a variety of topics. She is currently a partner at PA Consulting. Ed McGrady, he built and directed a team of 10 to 20 analysts at CNA devoted to the design and execution of professional games. He runs his own consultancy devoted to using games and game techniques to bring innovative experiences in new areas, and is an adjunct senior fellow at the Center for a New American Security. Roger Mason. Roger is an expert in the fields of emergency response analysis and training with more than 30 years of law enforcement experience. He created and runs his own company, which, among other services, designs and delivers war games for training, education, and problem solving. Anne Johnson is a civilian scientist at the US Naval Undersea Warfare Center. She conducts research on the use of systems dynamics modeling and wargaming to understand messy problems. And she defends her PhD dissertation next week. What you should note about these panelists and why you should pay attention to them is, between them, they have successfully worked for commercial, academic, government, and military organizations doing wargaming. An interesting point is that wargaming is part of the skill set each brings to the table and not the sole skill set. And that's something I'll lean on later. So each of them will address what barriers they have faced and how they overcame them in order to get hired, stay hired, progress, run their own business, and indeed hire other wargamers into the organizations that they work for. So there's two sides to this coin. There's you, the wargamer, wishing to advance or become hired. And then there's the perspective of the hiring manager, who everybody needs to pay a lot of attention to. So Sara, why don't you start and give us your perspectives? Take as long as you like, as long as it's not more than 20 minutes.
Thanks, Stephen. And I'm also half German, so I will definitely keep in line my half French side. But you might see some hands popping up once in a while because I'm so enthusiastic about wargaming. And thanks for having me. I think I will start with one kind of positive, so an opportunity, and also three challenges I have faced in my career, and share some stories around that. The first is that personally, I would have never thought I would have this sexy job title today of being a wargaming lead in a private sector setting and working across defense and businesses alike. So you never know where life will bring you. And that's one of the tips and advice or lessons learned I would like to convey to some of our viewers who are starting maybe in their wargaming career, is really always try something new. you really, really never know. That is usually where the magic happens, even if you feel a bit uncomfortable about it. And I really started as, for all my sins, as an academic. And I really was a bit geeky. And I actually looked at developing negotiation simulation to start with. So human-centered, not computer-based, and really to help train military and diplomatic personnel in international negotiations. And then I had the opportunity to actually join King's College, the first social science spin-off company there, who took military wargaming and adapted it to business. And then I joined the dark side of the force in the management consultancy in the private sector. And it's really something around embracing those opportunities, really trying something out. And as you pointed out, Stephen, very nicely, wargaming is a tool, an accelerator for other things like decision support, resilience, or readiness, or whatever you want to achieve. And it's a very good tool. So again, one of the first things is try something new and really don't be scared of doing that. So then the three challenges, I think one is might be more obvious, is around obviously diversity and the woman role, kind of role incredulity, as we often call it. I had it many times when I was younger, when they look at me and say, oh, you're making the coffee, or, you know, you are taking notes in that particular meeting around wargaming. It was really for the women out there who want to really embrace a career in wargaming, just be ready for it. And there is always a nice tool to use is obviously humor. That's worked very nicely for me. And I try to use also in different culture, different types of humor. It can be more incisive with some of our colleagues, but it can also be a bit more subtle with others. And it's really also very important that as a woman, you build that muscle and you make sure that you get proper sponsorship, proper allyship from your male colleagues. And that has been for me quite a game changer. And I try to now hopefully do the same with my team and really promote that. So diversity is always a big challenge in the wargaming sphere. The second challenge I have observed is, so there is an apologies for a lack of a better word is really around the military versus the business wargaming. So really looking at them in two different worlds, and actually really interestingly, you shouldn't. And that is one of the challenges that we are sometimes facing is there is maybe people are more comfortable when they are in their own circles and they don't want to be, challenged. But it is important to be a critical friend and actually to really look, can we merge those two sometimes? And yes, you can learn certain things from defense, military wargaming applied to business and vice versa. And that is quite an interesting point to really look at the amazing benefits that wargaming does overall and how can you be creative in enhancing learning or preparedness or readiness or whatever that is to really support a more informed and confident decision making. So again, I wouldn't necessarily separate those two, but bring those two together if you can, no matter where you are in a wargaming career. And obviously, I had it many times as well in the business world, where there are sometimes some colleagues who are not, or some clients who are not yet used, and there are not many, but there are a few who are not yet used to wargaming, who ask me, Sarah, what do you do? Do you crawl in the mud? Do you actually play computer games all day? So it's about educating them on what it is and really embracing that as well. But usually when they have tried one, they want another one because there are those aha moments. It does work. And there is a reason why we are doing or designing things in a certain way to not only learn about the planning, the content, but it's also a lot about behaviors. So don't forget to mesh those two and to be quite creative. And the last point, Stephen, from me, and obviously I'm happy to then really engage with the panel as well and see what they're thinking and with our audience, is the importance I have seen in my career of having a wargaming network. Hence why doing those connections are absolutely critical. It's you never, however years of experience you have in your career, you always bloody learn. It never ends. And it's especially true in the wargaming field. You have new wargaming applications, so again, military or business or both. You really learn different ways of going at it. Somebody has a new creative idea, you name it. And again, we can always all learn from each other. So having a good network, building that trusted circle of yours in wargaming is one of the things that has been very important to me. And Stephen, handing over, I hope I was not over time.
Thank you very much, Sarah. That was brilliant. So next, Ed McGrady, you're up.
Okay, I've done things. I've done a whole bunch of things in wargaming, and so I have a lot of variety of experiences. One of my characteristics is I'm pretty much exactly opposite of Stephen. So if Stephen says one color, I will say the complementary color. So he said obstacles. I'm going to talk about opportunities. But like I usually do, I'm going to digress from that immediately and talk about one major issue if you're running your own company. Stephen used a word called consultancy. I am not a consultant. I'm a manufacturer of war games. It matters for tax purposes. And so the first thing you learn if you run your own company, especially over here, is that the federal government is one of your main challenges. Both in terms of registration. There's a lot of registration that has to happen in terms of working for the federal government as a small business and getting various certifications, as well as insurance and a whole bunch of other things that come into being a small business. And one of which is there's a tax issue between consulting and not consulting, and I'm not consulting. So that's one of the obstacles that you face. And as you can see, I'm inherently very practical. I'm sort of a boots on the ground kind of guy. So I'll talk about some opportunities that I think are very practical things that involve you getting into and succeeding in the wargaming business or in the professional gaming business. One of which is, I think the first opportunity is the opportunity to show up. If you show up enough, and this has been proven, there are people that are active. We have jobs as wargamers now because they did not have one when they started, and they simply kept showing up until someone gave them a job within the community. And I think that is a very important lesson for people trying to get into this community, is showing up and taking advantage of and being able to take advantage of the opportunities that you're given. A long time ago, I was a hobby wargamer since forever. I'm mostly a role player. As well as a miniatures player. I'm a board wargamer a little bit less, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But I was a gamer, and one of the reasons I went to the Center for Naval Analysis, or CNA, out of graduate school is someone who had worked there said you get to play war games with Macintoshes on flex time. And it took me 30 years to get to that point, but nonetheless, eventually I got to play war games with Macintoshes on flex time. But when I got there, I wasn't doing wargaming. I was doing analysis. That's the bread and butter of the company. And I was an air analyst. I went out to Top Gun. I did a whole bunch of other stuff. And eventually, this guy named Peter Perlite became his friend. And he was doing a game on the shipbuilding industry. And I was like, I know stuff about games. I like games. Peter and I talked about hobby games and stuff. Can I help out, right? And he gave me this opportunity to observe the European part of the game, the European shipbuilders. There was different groups of shipbuilders, and I was observing the European shipbuilders during the game, and I was like, oh, I understand this. I've got this. It's just like a role-playing game. So if you do this and you do that, and I started helping Peter with the game in terms of control. And Peter began to understand, and other people noticed too, that I was actually capable of doing this. And so by not only sticking around and talking to people and finding out the opportunity, I also was very prepared for that opportunity, not only by being a experienced gamer, but also an analyst. And so both of those converged to highlight my wargaming capability to various people within the organization. And eventually I went on to run the wargaming team. And so I think that this idea of showing up consistently, learning your skills, learning how to do things within not only just wargaming, but analysis in general, is an important component to succeeding in wargaming. That brings me to my sort of second point. I think the other opportunity is to bring different people in. As a manager in particular, one of the and now as someone who kind of hires people and employs subcontractors. That's the correct phraseology. I employ subcontractors. Bringing different people into the community, into your business and into the community is, I think, really important, because as a hiring manager, I always said that, and I always still do contend, that you need three. You're looking for a unicorn when you look for a really good wargamer, one of which is they have to be a good analyst. They have to be a good military operations analyst for the purposes that I had when I was a manager. And so they have to be smart. They have to be technically capable. Like I just was saying before we came on the air, I'm trying to map out the telecommunications infrastructure on Taiwan. To do that, you have to be at least a somewhat decent engineer, familiar with how various systems and stuff work. And so you have to be a good analyst. You also have to know something about gaming. And knowing something about gaming has translated a lot within our community into being a hobby board wargamer. I think that is perhaps not necessarily the way the community is going in the future. I think there's fewer and fewer hobby board wargamers. I also think that produces a very narrow concept for what wargaming is, or professional gaming is. It's all hex encounters. It's all force on force gaming, when that's not what we do. At least what I do 90% of the time. 90% of the time I'm doing climate change. I'm doing organizational gaming. I'm doing command and control stuff. I'm not doing conventional force on force gaming. And so I think that role playing, as well as the Eurogaming and miniatures gaming, all collide with professional gaming and produce very interesting experiences and results that we need to exploit. But the third thing I always said is, so you need to know something about wargaming. You need to be a good analyst. Yeah. The third thing is the hardest thing. It's the biggest obstacle, to use Stephen's terminology, that I've ever found. And that is, you have to be, let me put it in a gentle way, you have to be capable of successfully interacting with other human beings in a professional setting. This is not necessarily a core competency for a lot of people, just a lot of people in general, much less a core competency for a lot of hobby wargamers. And so this challenge of being social and interacting with people successfully, clients as well as peers, as well as your boss and everybody else, can be a big challenge for some people. And you really don't necessarily want those people in your organization, because they cause all kinds of havoc and problems, and they can't sell war games that well. And what we're doing ultimately is we're selling our gaming capability. And so you need to combine all three of those as someone hiring, as well as someone trying to get hired as a professional gamer. And so I always had that third one as the most difficult challenge as far as hiring. It's also, I think, the most difficult challenge for a lot of people in general in industry, not just in the professional gaming community, but in general, this idea of self-management, self-control, the ability to get along with people, the ability to work collaboratively, that's always a challenge for a lot of people. And I think that's something that creates problems. Now, one of the things that leads to is sort of diversity in gaming. I think a more diverse hiring pool is what you want, simply because that skill mix is probably better represented. And I can almost guarantee you that it's easier for me to train someone in game design than it is for me to give someone a PhD in engineering or to make someone social. And so that's I think the challenge that we have in terms of thinking about diversity, is that diversity is actually an advantage by bringing different people in, because they bring these different skills in, which are very valuable within the community. And the third thing I want to talk about is the opportunity of working with difficult people, because there's a lot of, if you think about challenges once you get into the wargaming or the hobby. By wargaming, I'm talking professional gaming community. You have three different kinds of people that you have to work with. You have the players, which let's ignore the players because they're pretty much there for a short period of time. You have your co-workers, who can be in themselves very difficult. Note what I said previously about not being terribly self-aware in some cases, or the ability to work with other people. That can be a major challenge. And as a manager, you really have to double down on your skills as a people person to be able to manage difficult people that are working with you as well as peers across the organization. And you have to do so in a cooperative. Conflict just doesn't work. Well, I know we're war gamers and we like conflict, but conflict doesn't work. We have to adapt ourselves to a collaborative and cooperative environment. The worst situation is dealing with the sponsors and dealing with potential clients that can be difficult. I have found a solution for that. I simply don't work for difficult clients because I don't really care how much money I make. And so I find that to be a very salutary solution, but that may not be the best solution for everyone. And I don't really have a particular solution for that problem, but it can be very challenging when you get difficult clients. There's not a lot of them, but you're going to encounter them probably more than you want to. And so I think that's another major challenge. And I just don't have a solution for that. So with that depressing note on challenges as opposed to opportunities, what's an opportunity? It's an opportunity to use your social skills and excel. So there you go. With that, I'll conclude and turn it back over to Stephen. And like everyone says, I hope I didn't go too long.
Thank you very much, Ed. I took notes. Thank you, as I did with Sarah, but thank you for correcting me on the fact that you're not a consultant, you're a manufacturer. I hadn't thought about that as an important distinction. Roger, you're up next.
Well, it's great. It's so interesting because the first thing, what is Sarah? The first thing she talks about the wargaming community. And that's really my first point about you've got to be willing to engage the discipline and all those people. Wargaming is a people thing. It's done by people and you've got to be involved with them. Just like Ed said, and you got to get along with them. And how did I get started? I'm working on my dissertation and I'm reading all these books and one name comes up, Peter Perla. So I cold called him from California, said, hey, this is who I am. This is what I'm doing. And that one phone call is how I met. It's how I met Stephen, how I met Ed, and just dozens of people made those connections. And that has made all the difference. So you've got to reach out to people. The second thing is, I think you need to focus on professionalism. Now, I go to stuff and everybody talks about, I want to design professional games. Well, that's great. Well, I'm not interested in that. What I'm interested is in being a professional at what I do. And I always think about Pablo Picasso. What did he say? He said, art critics talk about form, structure, and meaning, and real artists talk about where they can get cheap turpentine. And it comes down to it's practical things. What are the things you do as a professional? And I think as a professional war game designer, there's two things that I always look at: your preparation and your execution. And preparation, are you reading the literature? Do you know the history? Do you read the blogs? Are you looking at like pack sims, ludic futurisms? You can look at my blog. There's a lot of things online. Are you following the research? There's a lot of non-secret research that's available from RAND, Air Force Research Laboratory, the Marine Corps, U.S. Marine Corps, the British Department of Defense, a lot of places that you can build that knowledge. And finally, are you playing games? A lot of people tell me they're war game designers, they don't play games. And they don't have to be playing, as Ed said, they don't have to be playing a commercial hex type game. There's all types of games. Are they playing games? The other half of being a professional is the execution. Every time I design a game, I always think that what I put into this, I'm representing a lot of people, because I've been to some major war games or major exercises, and they were terrible. And if I was involved in it, I would guarantee we'd never try something like that again. It was so poorly executed. So I take that seriously. And I will say as a caution, last year, I had the first thing that I was dissatisfied with how it turned out. And why was that? Because I got rushed into doing it. So you got to remember that too. You got to be careful. Make sure you have enough time to get it done. Next thing is find a niche for yourself. Ed talked about being there and people seeing your face. That's great. If you can find a niche, that helps too. What was my niche? 29 years in law enforcement. The thing when I was researching my dissertation, what I was interested in is you can have something like 9/11 or Columbine High School shooting where it is high criticality, but there's a low probability of occurrence. It doesn't happen very often. How do we train people? And the question I had was, 20 years after 9/11, who's going to be left on the New York City Fire Department that was there? Nobody, at least in a command position. So that's where I got involved in developing very simple games. And basically what I do now is a big part of our, Stephen brought up that we do other things. Well, a lot of what I do is I do emergency planning for all different types of organizations, big and small. And what I usually include is a gamer exercise with it. And then my last point is you got to be flexible. People say, well, Roger, how many war games have you designed? Well, actually, if you're going to use the term war game in the civilian world, very few. Why is that? I've done a lot of games and a lot of exercises, but you can't call them war games. Conflict simulation, decision-making exercise, active learning simulation. There's all different kinds of names. But what does it use? All the techniques of wargaming are involved. And that's what really makes them such a rich experience. So those are, that's kind of the way I look at it. And like I said, I think Sarah's point and Ed's point is critical for everybody. You've got to go and meet people. Are you involved with Moors? Are you involved with the Moors stuff online? Are you going to connections? You've got to get the money together and be there and see it, because Sarah's absolutely right. What do I do every time I go to those conferences? I see what people are doing. Why is that? Because there's a lot of smart people doing a lot of fantastic stuff. And I always think, man, I wish I thought of that. But that's where you learn. And so if you're not there, they're not going to, like Ed said, they won't see your face and you're not going to be learning anything. So, Stephen, that's all I've got.
Thank you very much. Most interesting. Anne, you're next. You're muted.
Okay, I think I'm unmuted. Hi, everyone. Thank you for being invited to speak on this panel with my esteemed colleagues, or not really colleagues, because I don't consider myself a wargamer. So I guess I'm different from everyone on the panel. And first off, I am here as a citizen, as a student, not part of my day job. In fact, I have approvals in place to volunteer to do wargaming because it is not related to my day job. So I have tried very hard to become part of the wargaming community, and I've actually think I've failed at that. So when Stephen asked me to be on a panel for wargaming, professional wargaming careers, I was like, why? I'm not a wargamer, I've never been one, and I've given up trying to become one. And he said, well, he wants the community to hear that. So I think wargaming, as has been described by these other folks here, does a tremendous job in trying to capture the complexity of situations and how human decision-making contributes to those changes, and how those changes then contribute to changes in the system that you then have to make different decisions. And I hear the field of wargaming trying to grow actively and advance in what they can do and expand. And while that's true, there are gaps in wargaming. And when I've tried to bring them up and how I think other tools can help to fill those gaps, the response has pretty much been one of two things: either we already do that, or that's not how wargaming works. And in trying to build collaborations that, of a larger modeling, simulation, analysis, and synthesis of these tools that are equals, where one is not subsumed and becomes part of the wargaming process, but is an equal team player of a larger process. So that's what I have realized I want to become. And I believe wargaming is one of those tools. So I've actually gone off and I've worked with some faculty in a university to develop a dissertation program. And I have reached out to folks within the wargaming community because I want to work to see how we can, with scientific rigor, integrate wargaming and system dynamics modeling and other tools to help have some academic and scientific rigor to see if we can fill some of these larger gaps that one tool alone can't fill. Stephen is actually on my dissertation committee, and I have reached out, as I've said, to others in the wargaming community and have received really positive responses. So there's great communication. But as far as being part of wargaming, I've never felt the love. I haven't felt hated, but so that's where I am. I've accepted that there is a larger community that I think other tools as well as wargaming can be part of, and I want to help contribute to how we can integrate those for an even larger process. That's what I have.
Thank you, Anne. So let's go to our producers and see, are there any questions that have been popping up in Discord that we should put to the panelists? So Merle. All questions have been answered. Okay. In that case, I will make a few comments. So Ed raised the point, and I think we've all suffered this, of dealing with difficult clients. The approach that I've seen used before starts with having the support of your own chain of command. Now, if you are, as Ed is, and I am now, you are your own chain of command, you need to look after yourself. But with your own chain of command support, you go back to the client or the sponsor. And I view this as important for any project. It's not just wargaming, any professional project that has a sponsor. Somebody is paying for a product or a service, and you need to pay attention to what that product or service is. And so in my world, we go back and we ask 4 questions, and most of you know what those on the panel know what those questions are. You start out with, what do you want? And you don't argue with that. That's what the client has told you they want. It doesn't matter how crazy it is. That's what they've asked for. They're the ones with the money. You don't tell them they're wrong. But you then engage in the second question, which is a discussion. Well, why do you want that? And you don't accept well, we want to win the war. We need to improve sales. That's the sort of surface. You need to dig down, because answering, especially in wargaming, answering a sort of, we want a war game on cyber warfare in the Middle East. Well, okay, where are the boundaries of that? Is this a one-day game? Is this a 6-month research effort with multiple games? What's the boundary? And that's often determined by, why do you want it? And you drill down, well, why do you want that? Why do you want that? It's not quite a 5 whys drill down. It's more like a lattice of questions. Answers to those questions give you the actors in the game, and gives you the nouns and the verbs, the actors and what they're doing. And now you have some idea of what goes into the scenario. Now comes the tricky part. You ask the sponsor, well, why don't you already have this? After all, you, Mr. Sponsor or Mrs. Sponsor, come from an organization for which this request is deeply interesting and concerning. Why are you reaching out? Why don't you already have the answer? What are the barriers? And these are barriers they won't volunteer to you until you ask. And you need to know what they are for a successful project. And you drill down on that. And then finally, how long are you in your position of being a sponsor? Are you going to rotate out of here in 6 months? Are you retiring in 3? That tells you a lot about the size of the project you have. So that's and you write this down. And you take it back to the sponsor and ask, is this what you want? And, if you have the luxury of not proceeding until the sponsor signs off on that, then you're golden. That doesn't stop the sponsor just changing their minds, irritating you later, etc. I've had the experience of my sponsor walking into move 1 of the game and changing the game design as we walked into move 1. And of course, the data we collected didn't match the objectives, and guess who got blamed for the analysis not actually fully answering the objectives? Well, I did. That will happen at some point in your career. Any comments on that from the panel? How do you deal with unreasonable sponsors?
I'll say one thing that's a real red flag. You walk in and one of the people that are sponsoring comes over and says, really glad you're doing this because this is going to prove what I've said for years. And this game will prove it. Oh, man.
How do you address that? When a sponsor's, I mean, either that or explicitly says, I want a game to demonstrate the supremacy of air power in this situation, or how this particular model of tank is superior to that one. How do you, what's your response? Sarah?
Yeah, and I usually say that obviously wargaming is not, to predict the future or a crystal ball, and really looking at why is it that they are asking or wanting this, like you pointed out as well, around really finding from the sponsor what are the details, drilling into that. And I would also look at the dynamics as well, making maybe not like the FBI, but having a bit of a deep dive into the personalities or the background of those difficult children, let me put it that way, and then go from there. I think another one I was thinking about when Stephen, you were mentioning difficult clients. Yeah, we all had some. And when you said you had move one being changed, I had something very similar on, just half an hour before. Oh, we should do that, Sarah. Yeah, sure. Just when it's about to start. I think it's really, really important from the start to be extremely clear and have a design committee. That is usually, I will use more the kind of Germanic process, and having your sponsors and being very clear on what they do, what they don't do, so you can really not box them in, but you can really have clear roles and responsibilities up front. But it's a very, very tricky question around having an ask like this. I would really, really turn it around and really see actually what is your problem? Please tell me more about that. And usually it's something completely different. And then we will get to actually the core of what is needed. But Stephen, that is a very difficult one.
Anne, do you have any comments?
Was that Anne or Ed?
Anne.
Okay. Yeah, so I was thinking the same when you were talking about the whys, why do you need this? Why don't you have it? In system dynamics modeling, when we would have a sponsor for model development, they have a problem, like you said, and we develop a reference behavior of what is that problem over time. So dynamics, there's time involved. And then we develop what would be like a hoped and feared behavior, which really becomes not courses of action of what could happen, but a range of possibilities from beneficial to catastrophic. What's the range? But so that speaks a little bit to what you were talking about, but specifically to difficult clients. I think we also need to realize, and I think everyone here does, I'm just saying we in general, people that come with problems, they do have problems. And sometimes we need to realize their problem is to succeed in their problem. Yes, it fits in a larger picture, but we do need to help them see how they can succeed with their problem. So I think from this, it does fit into a larger picture because things are more complex than just one perspective. How does your success fit into who you need to respond to, or who your client is, and then be able to speak in terms of that. So, but sometimes it's easy to say, oh, that person just thinks it's their pretty baby and they want to make sure that succeeds. But sometimes a choice has to be made and we have to figure out how to optimize that choice. So understand where in that type of spectrum things reside so we can speak in terms of this is how we can make your problem successful, or you successful in this problem, and how it would feed into what you need to feed into.
Thank you. I have to admit that in the case of the situation I faced, it was clearly my fault. I had not spent enough time drilling down with my sponsor on what they really wanted. I accepted their first set of answers, and I should have been more aware and kept probing, because clearly the design didn't actually answer the question. So mea culpa. It was a very interesting experience for me to go through, and I hope I learned from it. Ed, you mentioned having difficult clients and what you do about them.
Yeah, well, as you know, I teach wargaming, so I have several lectures already pre-prepared that go on and on and on. So I basically, if it depends on the situation, but if they want to do something that's inadvisable and they don't understand what a game is, I start lecturing them until they agree with me.
Yeah.
But the other thing is that if a sponsor changes up things the day of or during execution, that can be very difficult. And so if you anticipate the sponsor doing that, you can always take them aside and deal with it beforehand. Like, look, if we get into an argument in the middle of this, it's not going to go well. And so we need to have some baseline agreement on what we're going to do here before you start the game. If it's a trivial change, and by trivial, I don't mean it's not a major change, but if it's a reasonable change, like instead of, we're now going to suddenly deal with automotive adhesives instead of Wargaming Taiwan, that's a big change, and that's not trivial. But if it's, on the other hand, we want to dial ahead by 3 or 4 months in the Taiwan scenario, then it's like, okay, it's my job. That's what I get paid for, to be a professional game controller, and I will adapt and overcome that to the best I can. I will also tell the sponsor that, look, here's how we're going to do this, and so it's going to change things a little bit. And so basically, having a dialogue with sponsors who understand but want to do something, having the ability to flex and do stuff to the sponsor's requirements, and then having the ability to push back in terms of changing the sponsor when the sponsor doesn't understand something or isn't aware of how things will go. You need to educate the sponsor as far as what a game is, how it's going to be controlled, how things likely will go. And I'm facing this I'm facing this in a lot of games right now where we have zero time to do stuff, and we have zero time to debate stuff. And I have to make sure the sponsors are fully aware that it's just a very, very tight timeline. So,
sorry, Roger?
One thing is, I would tell people, if you're going to do this work, you can't take this stuff personal.
Mm-hmm.
I worked on a major project of reorganizing a large fire department last year, and part of what we ended up with, the leaders were very concerned about urban wildfires, and I designed a very large exercise war game for them. In the 2 months prior to the execution of that, the fire chief retired, new one came in. Game never happened, but I had it all on the table ready to go. I got paid, and you just have to say, well, that's how it is. It can't be personal, and because he wanted to change everything at the last minute, and I just said, this is so far from where I was told that it had to be, and our committee agreed upon. We can't do it. So
it becomes a new project that he has to start paying for, right?
Yeah.
Well, the thing is that when you work as a small business, you got to understand that you're in kind of a different situation than you are within an organization, and you are working for them. You're actually working for them, and you basically have to understand, sort of check your ego at the door, as opposed to in other situations where you may be the boss or you may be in charge. You may have other leverage. You don't have a lot of leverage as a small business.
Right. I've actually had the other experience of my boss changing the wargame design in the middle of the game. And the way we dealt with that was to warn the boss, I'm the professional designer. This is what's going to happen, but you insist it isn't. Fine. We will do the best we can to make your changes work. But if they don't, your name goes down in the report as why they don't. And my boss was sufficiently confident that he agreed to that. And guess what? It didn't work, and his name did go in the report. Sarah, you put your hand up.
Yeah, no, Stephen, that is interesting. I just wanted to add as well, more and more what I see currently as well is really about, I know it's a buzzword, but it's so important upfront to create psychological safety. Because especially with war games, it's really going to lay bare what doesn't work. And we know they are going to fail, dirty word, but actually that I use usually on purpose. And really trying, mind you, it takes time. And what Ed was saying is really about educating them, yeah, absolutely, in the process, in what it is, and really being oversharing on this to create psychological safety. Just wanted to add that, Steve.
Thank you. The technique I've used when the sponsor turns up and says, I want a game that proves my concept is the best one. I mean, you know, you can say, no, go away, but that's not very constructive. It doesn't solve their problem and you don't get paid. The approach I've taken is to have the discussion about what you want and why do you want it. And basically, it runs along this lines. You say, well, clearly this is important. You have done the work to show the benefits of your concept, platform, or whatever. Are there people who would oppose this, who view that you are competing for money with? And, you know, either in the business world, they're your customers and the people who are providing them with alternative solutions, or in the military world, it's other services, other branches, other organizations. And the answer to that is usually yes, there are such people. Well, I say, wouldn't you rather know about the weaknesses of your concept before you're told about them by your competitors? Wouldn't you, you know, we'll have a game that addresses the downsides. You've already addressed the upsides. Let's address the downsides so that you can cover for them, defend them, or know about them before going forward. The results of the game are private to the sponsor. And that's the approach I've taken there. Okay, I saw a question pop up on our screen from participants. Is it still there? Well, if my memory serves, it was, what are the critical skills to be a successful wargamer? Here we go. What's the most difficult essential skill set you had to learn to become a professional? What was the most difficult one, guys, that you had to learn? Who wants to go first? Ed, you put your hand up.
Managing people. I'm managing my boss, managing my people, managing my clients. The sort of second major game I did after the shipbuilding, well, I'm not sure, but certainly the first one I led myself was a major game over in Italy, looking at NATO, an issue in NATO. And it was like 3-star generals and my entire chain of command, all the way up to the CEO of the company, were all there. And I had all my team there. And so I had to look after my team. I had to deal with bosses of bosses of bosses. And I had to deal with a bunch of 3-star players. And so it was a baptism by fire on managing people. But that's what you have to do. Is I think the biggest challenge was managing people, including yourself.
Mm-hmm. Sarah.
Yes, I had the same first reaction as Ed. It's all about, yes, how do you handle and bring in herd cats when need be, or push and shove when you have to. I think for me, from a pure skill set point of view, it's this ecosystem view. So being able to go to the balcony and zooming in at the same time. So having this zooming in, zooming out, and have this kind of system of systems view is really, really an interesting skill to have, to be able to go into the details, but see also the interdependencies, etc.
Roger?
I think one of the things is just being flexible. And, you know, it takes a while to develop the experience to know what's going on, because a lot of times you think, oh, they hired me, I'm designing this exercise or game or whatever, it's going to go like this. Well, you know, more times than not, it will not go like that. There's going to be unexpected things, and you just have to be flexible for them. And that's something that takes experience. As you do it more, you become more flexible.
Anne.
Yeah, so One thing, what everyone else has said, certainly I agree with. Related back to the difficult sponsors, I guess one thing, it's kind of, I guess, related to you got to have a thick skin, but being able to deal with, you've put in so much work to develop a game, an analysis event, whatever, and it goes great, and then the sponsor rewrites the final report to what they want to be, and all of the work that really could have helped change things gets really put on the cutting room floor, and you have to deal with that somehow. I mean, I've fought back, and it results in being removed from the project. And at some point, you're like, well, I'd rather not be part of a project if it's going to really twist things around to only get a preconceived decision. So dealing with how that interplay falls out can be tough.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's not just dealing with people you are managing, is it? It's dealing with your colleagues. It's dealing with the sponsor. It's dealing with your own boss.
And I think related to what Sara was saying, so when you talk about the ecosystems, balcony, and going down, I collectively use the term systems thinking for that, because it talks about dynamics over time, over space, global behaviors, regional, local, and I think it's not necessarily formally trained, but that is a skill that wargaming developers inherently develop and have, and it can be really difficult to describe the inherent complexities and that we're dealing with complex problems to people who have a complicated mindset. And these are two different foundational ways of thinking of problems. You can't really solve things that we're trying to game, but you can figure out how they work and maybe how to manage them for at least a time. So I think being able to walk those two different types of really foundational types of thinking about problems is something that happens, but maybe is not talked about.
Thank you. Any other questions from the from Discord or? Okay. Any other parting shots from our panelists? What haven't we covered? Anything? Anybody? Well, in that case, I will call this panel to a close. Thank you all very much for being here and providing your wisdom. And we should hang around for a little bit more. Chris Weaver sent the message, don't run off when we're done. So he presumably has some messages for us. So Chris or Merle, we are drawing this panel to a close.